Community Bank in Chicago, a quiet bank teller was about to face the choice that would end 3 years of carefully constructed lies. What started as an ordinary Thursday afternoon took a shocking turn when they came face to face with three armed robbers who had no idea who they were really threatening. Clara Hayes wasn't your typical financial services employee. For over a decade, she had spent her life infiltrating the most dangerous criminal organizations across 7 countries, known for her ability to disappear into any identity and emerge alive from situations that killed trained operatives. When she encountered the masked gunmen holding assault rifles to her colleagues' heads, she had no idea she was about to be forced back into the deadly world she'd tried so desperately to leave behind. Clara's split-second decision to protect innocent lives would lead to the complete destruction of her carefully maintained civilian cover. What began as a professional bank robbery would become a tactical battlefield where a hidden federal operative fought to save hostages while keeping her lethal past buried. The quiet Chicago neighborhood would never be the same after discovering that their most unassuming bank teller was someone very dangerous people had been hunting for years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain drummed against the windows of Westwood Community Bank with the steady persistence of a Chicago autumn afternoon. Clara Hayes counted out 20s for Mrs. Patterson's weekly withdrawal, her movements precise and unhurried despite the growing line of customers seeking shelter from the downpour. "There you go, Mrs. Patterson. Will there be anything else today?" Clara's voice carried the practiced warmth of someone who had perfected the art of being memorable for all the right reasons: polite, efficient, forgettable. "Thank you, dear. You're always so thorough." The elderly woman tucked the bills into her purse with arthritic fingers. "I don't know what we'd do without you." Clara smiled, the expression reaching her eyes just enough to seem genuine. "Have a wonderful afternoon. Drive carefully in this weather." As Mrs. Patterson shuffled toward the exit, Clara's gaze swept the lobby with the kind of casual surveillance that looked like customer service but missed nothing. 3 customers waiting in line. Miguel Ortiz, positioned near the entrance, his security guard uniform crisp despite the humidity. Manager Leonard Briggs, visible through his glass office door, bent over paperwork. The usual Thursday rhythm. "Clara!" Evelyn Carter bounced over from the adjacent teller window, her enthusiasm undimmed by the dreary weather. At 23, Evie still approached each workday like an adventure waiting to unfold. "Did you see the weird car outside? It's been sitting there for like 20 minutes. Clara's pulse didn't change, but her peripheral vision sharpened. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could make out a dark sedan idling across the street. 2 figures in the front seats, exhaust visible in the cool air. She filed the information away with the same automatic precision she'd once used to catalog potential escape routes in Tehran nightclubs and Moscow cafes. "Probably waiting for someone," Clara said, turning back to her computer screen. "You know how people use our parking lot as a meeting spot." "I guess." Evie lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Miguel thinks I'm paranoid, but something about it gives me the creeps. They keep looking over here." Clara nodded sympathetically, while her trained instincts parsed the threat level. Surveillance was often the prelude to action, but it could also be coincidental: a jealous spouse, private investigators, even undercover law enforcement. Without additional data points, the sedan remained an anomaly worth monitoring, but not worth breaking cover. "Speaking of Miguel," Evelyn continued, "he's been extra vigilant today, keeps checking the locks and walking the perimeter. Says quiet days make him nervous." That observation carried more weight. Miguel Ortiz had been a Marine before family obligations brought him home to Chicago. His instincts had been honed in places where complacency killed. If he was sensing something off, Clara respected that judgment. "Better safe than sorry," Clara said, glancing toward the security guard. Miguel stood with his back to the customer area, watching the street through the front windows. His posture was relaxed, but ready, weight balanced, hands free, head on a swivel. Good habits from his military days that made him more effective than most bank security. The next customer approached Clara's window, Henry Walsh, a retired postal worker who came in every Thursday to deposit his pension check. His weathered face brightened when he saw her, the kind of genuine pleasure that came from decades of treating people as individuals rather than transactions. "Afternoon, Miss Clara. How are you holding up in this weather?" "Just fine, Mr. Walsh. Same deposit today?" "You know it." He slid the check across the counter with hands that showed the careful steadiness of someone who'd spent a lifetime handling other people's mail with respect. "Rain like this reminds me of my delivery days. Nothing stopped the mail, but days like this made you appreciate the dry ones." Clara processed the deposit with practiced efficiency, but part of her attention remained on Henry's demeanor. He was observant in the way that comes from 40 years of walking through neighborhoods, reading the subtle signs that indicated whether a street was safe or sliding toward trouble. Today, his movements carried a slight tension she hadn't seen before. "Everything all right, Mr. Walsh?" He glanced around the lobby before leaning slightly closer. "Probably nothing, but that car outside has been making me nervous. Reminds me of surveillance work I used to see when I delivered to government buildings downtown. The way they're positioned, watching approaches rather than waiting for someone." Clara's estimation of Henry Walsh shifted upward several notches. Most civilians noticed obvious things, someone acting aggressively, shouting, or waving a weapon. Henry was noticing tactical positioning. That level of awareness suggested either natural instinct or hard-earned experience. "I'm sure it's nothing," Clara said, completing his transaction. "Old habits. Stay safe, Miss Clara." As he walked away, Clara's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Package delivery in 5 minutes. Confirm receipt." She deleted the message immediately, muscle memory from a time when coded communications was routine. Wrong number, obviously, but the terminology, package, delivery, confirm receipt, carried enough operational language to trigger old reflexes. Another anomaly in a day that was accumulating them. "Clara, can you cover my window for a minute?" Evie asked. "I need to grab something from the break room." "Of course." Clara moved to the adjacent station, positioning herself with clear sight lines to both entrance points and the manager's office. The habit was so ingrained, she no longer consciously planned it. Her body simply oriented itself for maximum situational awareness. Through the windows, the sedan remained in position. Its occupants hadn't moved, and the rain had grown heavier, reducing visibility but not eliminating it. If they were conducting surveillance, they were committed enough to sit through uncomfortable conditions. Professional or desperate? Either option carried implications. Miguel appeared at her station, his expression thoughtful. "Evie mentioned the car outside. You notice anything unusual about it?" "Hard to tell from here," Clara said carefully. "Why?" "Instinct, maybe. 22 years in the Corps teaches you to pay attention when things don't feel right." He paused, studying her face. "You seem pretty calm about it." "Should I be worried?" "Probably not. But I've been thinking about our security protocols, and honestly, they're designed for basic stuff. Angry customers, petty theft, maybe someone trying to pass bad checks. If something serious happened? Never mind. Just a feeling." Clara understood the feeling. She'd learned to trust those instincts in places where the margin for error was measured in seconds rather than minutes. But Miguel didn't know about Sarajevo or the undercover work that had taken her deep into criminal organizations where a misread signal meant disappearing forever. He saw a competent bank teller who kept her head in a crisis, not someone whose training included advanced tactical response and close-quarters combat.
"The police response time to this area is pretty good," she said, offering the kind of reassurance a civilian would find comforting. "True." Miguel straightened, apparently deciding to trust the official protocols rather than his gut. "I'm going to do another perimeter check anyway. Better to be paranoid than sorry." As he walked away, Clara caught sight of the sedan's brake lights flashing once before the vehicle pulled away from the curb. Not an abrupt departure, but a deliberate one, timed perhaps to Miguel's movement toward the exit. Either coincidence or evidence that someone had been watching the bank's security patterns. She checked the clock. 4:47 p.m. Closing time approached, bringing with it the daily routines that made banks particularly vulnerable: staff reductions, cash counts, vault procedures. If someone was planning something, the transition period between normal operations and closing protocols provided maximum opportunity with minimum witness exposure. Evie returned from the break room, her earlier nervousness replaced by excited chatter about weekend plans. Leonard Briggs emerged from his office to begin closing preparations. Miguel completed his circuit and resumed his position near the entrance, apparently satisfied that his concerns had been unfounded. Everything appeared normal, but Clara's training had taught her that normal was often an illusion, maintained right up until the moment it shattered completely. The sedan had circled back. At 4:52 p.m., as Leonard Briggs reached for the security panel to begin closing procedures, 3 figures in dark clothing and ski masks burst through the front entrance with the coordinated precision of a military operation. "Nobody moves. Everyone on the ground, now." The command came from the lead figure, a tall man whose voice carried absolute authority, backed by the kind of assault rifle that turned suggestions into orders. Behind him, a smaller figure swept left, while a third moved right, their formation designed to dominate every angle of the lobby in seconds. Clara's world slowed to the hyper-focused clarity she hadn't experienced in 3 years. Time dilated as her mind automatically cataloged tactical information. Lead subject, approximately 6'2", military bearing, weapon discipline evident in his handling of what appeared to be an AR-15 platform. Second subject, smaller build, agitated movement patterns suggesting higher stress levels and potentially unpredictable responses. Third subject, moving with practiced efficiency toward the rear exit, escape route security or perimeter control. Customer screams filled the air as people dropped to the floor, but Clara heard them through the analytical filter of someone trained to function in chaos. Mrs. Patterson fumbled her purse, spilling contents across the marble floor. Henry Walsh went down near the customer service area, his movements controlled and deliberate rather than panicked. Miguel's hand had started toward his weapon before the reality of the odds froze him in place. "I said, on the ground." The leader's voice cut through the noise. "Hands where I can see them." Clara followed orders, lowering herself to the floor with the careful movements of someone who understood that survival often depended on appearing compliant while remaining ready. Her position gave her sight lines to all 3 subjects while appearing to focus on the marble tiles inches from her face. The leader strode toward the teller counter with the kind of purposeful movement that suggested extensive advanced planning. This wasn't a desperate smash-and-grab operation by amateurs high on adrenaline and bad decisions. The tactical formation, weapon selection, and coordinated timing indicated professional-level preparation. He pointed the rifle at Leonard Briggs, who had gone pale behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Manager, right? You're going to open the vault. No alarms, no heroics, just business." I need authorization codes. The time lock won't release until—" "Wrong answer." The leader's voice remained calm, which made it more frightening than shouting would have been. "The vault has a manual override for emergencies. You're going to use it." Clara filed that information away. These weren't random criminals who had watched too many movies about bank jobs. They knew the technical details of the security systems, which suggested either inside information or sophisticated reconnaissance. The sedan outside was surveillance, not coincidence. The second figure, a woman Clara realized from the voice, moved aggressively toward the teller stations where Evie cowered behind the counter. Everyone stays quiet, nobody gets hurt, but if someone tries to be a hero— She let the threat hang unfinished, but her finger positioning on the trigger and the slight tremor in her stance suggested someone operating on a shorter fuse than the disciplined leader. In Clara's experience, the nervous ones were often more dangerous than the professionals. Unpredictability bred casualties. "Please," Evie whispered, her voice barely audible, "I'll do whatever you want. Just don't—" "Shut up." The woman's aggression spiked, and she swung the weapon toward Evie with enough force to make the young teller flinch backward. Miguel shifted slightly, his protective instincts warring with tactical reality. Clara caught his eye and gave the faintest shake of her head, a motion so subtle it could have been mistaken for trembling. He understood and held position, but he could see the tension building in his shoulders. The leader had reached Briggs and grabbed him by the collar with practiced efficiency. You have 60 seconds to decide whether opening that vault is worth more to you than staying alive. After that, we start with the customers. Clara's threat assessment crystallized with uncomfortable clarity. These weren't thieves who would grab what they could and run. The level of planning, the tactical awareness, and the willingness to threaten lethal force suggested an operation designed to succeed regardless of casualties. The professional competence made them more dangerous, but it also made them predictable. They would follow their plan until circumstances forced adaptation. Through the windows, she could see the growing collection of emergency vehicles that signaled law enforcement response. Red and blue lights painted the rain-soaked street, and the distinctive bulk of tactical vehicles indicated this was being treated as a serious threat. Good for eventual resolution, but potentially catastrophic for immediate survival. Cornered professionals often chose to fight rather than surrender. The leader checked his watch with the automatic gesture of someone operating on a strict timeline. When he spoke again, his voice carried the kind of controlled urgency that suggested their window for success was narrowing. "Change of plans," he announced to his team. "We're looking at a longer timeline than expected. Secure the perimeter and prepare for extended negotiations." Clara's stomach dropped. Extended meant hostages. Hostages meant leverage. And leverage meant they planned to use innocent people as bargaining chips in whatever game they were playing with law enforcement outside. The woman near the teller counter turned toward the lobby, surveying their human assets with a calculating gaze like someone selecting tools for a job. Her attention fixed on Evie, who represented youth, vulnerability, and maximum emotional impact for negotiation purposes. "You," she said, gesturing with her weapon. "Pretty girl, come here." Evie's terrified whimper cut through Clara's analytical detachment like a blade. The young woman who brought enthusiasm to every shift and worried about being alone on late nights was about to become a pawn in a game that could easily turn lethal. Clara's 3 years of careful civilian camouflage, the quiet bank teller who processed transactions and kept her head down, began to crack under the pressure of watching innocent people face genuine danger. She could maintain her cover and hope for the best, trusting in law enforcement protocols and the robber's presumed desire to avoid murder charges. Or she could remember what she had been before Clara Hayes existed, when her job was to survive in situations exactly like this one and bring everyone home alive. The choice crystallized as the woman grabbed Evie's arm and dragged her to the center of the lobby, where her terror would be visible to anyone watching from outside. Clara's protective instincts, honed by years of working with partners whose lives depended on her competence, finally overrode her commitment to staying hidden. But first, she needed to understand exactly what they were dealing with. Pressed against the cold marble floor, Clara forced herself to breathe normally, while her mind shifted into the analytical mode that had kept her alive in Moscow, Berlin, and a dozen other areas.
Cities where one wrong assumption meant never coming home. The robbers thought they controlled the situation, but control was an illusion that could be shattered by someone who understood the true dynamics at play. The leader, she mentally designated him Alpha, moved with the kind of fluid efficiency that came from military training or extensive criminal experience. His weapon handling was textbook perfect, muzzle discipline maintained even while issuing orders. When he checked his watch, the gesture was automatic rather than nervous, someone accustomed to operating on strict timelines under pressure. More telling was his communication pattern. Rather than shouting commands to his team, he used subtle hand signals that kept the customers unaware of tactical adjustments. When he wanted the third man to cover the rear exit, 2 fingers pointed down followed by a gesture toward the back of the building. Professional language that suggested either military background or extensive operational experience. The woman, Beta, in Clara's mental taxonomy, represented the wild card in their formation. Her weapon technique was adequate but not refined, grip slightly too high on the stock, stance betraying nervous energy rather than trained readiness. When she moved, it was with the quick, aggressive motions of someone operating on adrenaline rather than discipline. In Clara's experience, the nervous ones were the most likely to escalate violence when plans went sideways. The third man, Gamma, had positioned himself near the rear emergency exit with the kind of natural tactical awareness that suggested this wasn't his first high-stakes operation. Unlike Beta's aggressive posturing, he remained calm and observant, scanning for threats rather than trying to intimidate customers. His role appeared to be perimeter security and escape route management, critical functions that required steady nerves and professional competence. Through the building's acoustics, Clara could hear the distinctive sound of police vehicles arriving outside, multiple engines, radio chatter, and the organized chaos of a developing tactical situation. Alpha heard it too, his posture shifting slightly as external pressure began to factor into his decision matrix. "Time to make some phone calls," Alpha announced, pulling out a cell phone with his free hand. "Let them know we're here for business, not blood, as long as everyone follows the rules." Clara noted the phrasing, not the desperate bravado of amateurs in over their heads, but the calculated language of professionals who understood leverage and negotiation. They had come prepared for law enforcement response, which meant they had contingency plans and probably escape routes that went beyond the obvious exit points. Henry Walsh lay approximately 6 feet to her left, his weathered face pressed against the floor, but his eyes alert and tracking. Unlike the other customers, who seemed frozen by fear, Henry was observing with the same careful attention she recognized in herself. When their eyes met for a fraction of a second, she saw understanding rather than panic. He knew this was a tactical situation that required patience and timing rather than heroics. Miguel remained near the entrance, forced into a kneeling position with his hands visible but clearly calculating options. His security training had taught him basic threat response, but Clara could see him struggling with the gap between textbook scenarios and reality. He wanted to act, to fulfill his protective responsibilities, but the weapons disparity made any aggressive moves suicidal. Evie stood in the center of the lobby now, Beta's weapon trained on her back while tears streamed down her face. The young woman's terror was genuine and absolute. She had no experience with violence, no training for crisis situations, no understanding that survival often depended on staying calm rather than giving in to fear. "Please," Evie whispered again, her voice barely audible. "I have a sister. She's only 16. I can't—" "Shut up!" Beta's aggression spiked again, the weapon jerking in her hands with enough force to make several customers gasp. "Nobody cares about your family." Clara recognized the signs of someone operating beyond their comfort zone. Beta's stress indicators, elevated voice, unnecessary movement, trigger discipline slipping, suggested she was the weak link in their professional facade. Useful information for later, but immediately dangerous for everyone in the building. Alpha finished his phone call and studied the front windows where law enforcement activity continued to build. When he spoke, his voice carried new urgency. "They're setting up for a long negotiation. That means we need to establish our position clearly." He turned toward the hostages, his gaze sweeping across them with calculating assessment. "Everyone stays calm, follows orders, and this ends with everyone going home tonight. But if someone decides to be heroic—" He let the threat hang unfinished, but his meaning was clear. I'd heard similar speeches in other contexts, the measured tone of someone prepared to follow through on violence if necessary, but preferring not to complicate an already complex situation with unnecessary casualties. The problem was that Beta didn't share Alpha's discipline. Her stress levels were climbing, and stressed people made mistakes. Fatal mistakes. I shifted slightly, testing the range of motion available without drawing attention. My position on the floor actually provided tactical advantages: lower profile, stable shooting platform if needed, and the element of surprise since everyone expected hostages to remain helpless and compliant. But moving from observer to actor meant abandoning 3 years of careful civilian camouflage. Once I revealed my capabilities, there would be no returning to the quiet anonymity of Clara Hayes' bank teller. Law enforcement would have questions, colleagues would want explanations, and somewhere in the background of my hidden past, people who had very good reasons for wanting me dead might realize I was still alive. Through the windows, I caught sight of tactical vehicles and what appeared to be a sniper team taking position on the building across the street. Standard law enforcement protocol for hostage situations, but also an escalation that would increase pressure on the robbers to either negotiate quickly or prepare for a siege. Alpha's radio crackled with activity, communication with someone outside, probably a lookout or getaway driver. The conversation was brief and coded, but I caught enough to understand that their timeline was compressing. Whatever plan they had developed was being forced to adapt to changing circumstances. That adaptation phase was always the most dangerous period in any operation. People made mistakes when their carefully rehearsed plans encountered unexpected variables. In my experience, that was when situations turned lethal, when professionals started improvising under pressure. Beta yanked Evie closer to the window, using her as a visible shield for anyone watching from outside. The young woman's terror was becoming more audible, her terror reaching the point where rational thought became impossible. "Look at me," Beta commanded, grabbing Evie's chin with her free hand. "You're going to help us send a message to the people outside. Are you going to cooperate, or do I need to motivate you?" My protective instincts crystallized into cold operational clarity. I could continue to lie still, maintain my cover, and hope that law enforcement protocols would resolve the situation without casualties. Or I could accept that 3 years of hiding were about to end and start doing what I had once been very, very good at. The choice became academic when Beta raised her weapon toward Evie's head. Clara Hayes, quiet bank teller, closed her eyes for the last time. When they opened, someone much more dangerous was looking out through them. The bullhorn's electronic screech cut through the rain-soaked afternoon, its amplified voice carrying the measured authority of professional law enforcement. "This is Detective Sam Bennett with the Chicago Police Department. I need to speak with whoever's in charge inside the bank." Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Clara remained motionless against the marble floor, but her attention sharpened to laser focus. The voice outside carried the calm, patient tone of someone trained in crisis negotiation. No aggression, no ultimatums, just the steady professionalism of a cop who understood that successful hostage resolution required building rapport rather than applying pressure. Alpha moved to the front windows, staying back far enough to avoid sniper sight lines while maintaining visual contact with the growing law enforcement presence outside. When he responded, his voice was controlled and businesslike.
"Detective Bennett, I'm listening, but let's establish some ground rules first. We have 8 hostages inside, all of them cooperatives so far. That cooperation continues as long as everyone outside respects our position." Clara parsed both sides of the conversation with the analytical precision that had once made her valuable to federal task forces. Bennett was following textbook negotiation protocol: establish communication, build rapport, gather intelligence about the subjects and hostages. Alpha was responding with the kind of tactical awareness that suggested either military training or extensive criminal experience. More concerning was Beta's increasing agitation. She paced behind Evie like a predator circling prey, her weapon handling becoming less disciplined with each passing minute. Every time Alpha spoke to the police, Beta's stress indicator spiked higher, jaw clenched, breathing shallow, trigger finger showing the kind of tension that turned accidents into tragedies. "We can work together on this," Bennett continued from outside. "But I need to know that everyone inside is safe. Can you put one of the hostages on to confirm their condition?" Alpha considered the request with the calculating expression of someone weighing tactical advantages. Proof of life was standard procedure, but it also provided law enforcement with intelligence about the hostage's physical and mental state.
Smart negotiators use those brief conversations to gather information about weapons, positioning, and the subject's psychological profiles. One hostage, 30 seconds, no tricks. Alpha agreed. He scanned the hostages with predatory assessment before his gaze settled on Henry Walsh. You, old man, you're going to tell Detective Bennett that everyone's alive and unharmed. Nothing else. Henry struggled to his feet with the careful movements of someone whose joints had been protesting the marble floor's cold hardness. As he approached the window, Clara caught his eye for a fraction of a second. The elderly man's expression was alert rather than terrified, and she recognized the same tactical awareness she'd noted earlier. Detective Bennett, this is Henry Walsh. I'm a customer here, and I want you to know that everyone inside is unharmed. The people here are treating us with respect, and we're all cooperating fully. Clara noted Henry's careful word choice. Not just unharmed, but treating us with respect. Language designed to suggest the hostage-takers were rational rather than violent. It was either natural wisdom or trained de-escalation technique, and either option raised her estimation of Henry's usefulness in whatever was coming. "Thank you, Mr. Walsh," Bennett responded, his voice carrying genuine warmth. "We're going to get everyone out safely. Just stay calm and follow instructions." As Alpha pulled the phone away, Clara caught Bennett's subtle emphasis on everyone out safely. Not just the hostages, but a reminder that surrender remained an option for the subjects as well. Professional-level psychology designed to keep communication channels open. Beta's agitation spiked again during the conversation. She jerked Evie's arm with unnecessary force, dragging the young woman closer to the center of the lobby where she would be visible to anyone watching from outside. "This is taking too long," Beta hissed to Alpha, her voice carrying the sharp edge of someone losing patience with careful planning. "We should have been out of here already." "Stick to the plan," Alpha replied without taking his attention off the windows. "Patience gets us home alive." But Clara could see the cracks forming in their team cohesion. Beta was operating on adrenaline and fear, while Alpha remained focused on tactical discipline. That kind of divergence in stress response often led to communication breakdowns, and communication breakdowns in high-stakes situations led to mistakes. Fatal mistakes. Miguel shifted position slightly, testing his range of movement without drawing attention. Clara caught the subtle motion and recognized the signs of someone preparing for action. His protective instincts were warring with tactical reality, and she could see him calculating odds and distances with the kind of focused intensity that preceded decisive action. She needed to influence his decision-making before he did something heroic and stupid. Clara let her hand drift slightly across the floor, a motion so small it appeared accidental. A pen had rolled from Mrs. Patterson's scattered purse contents, and Clara's fingers closed around it with the careful precision of someone who understood that improvised weapons required imagination rather than lethality. She palmed the pen and caught Miguel's attention with a subtle shift in position. When their eyes met, she gave the faintest shake of her head. Not yet. Wait for opportunity rather than creating desperation. Miguel's tactical training kicked in, and he recognized the wisdom in patience over aggression. His posture relaxed fractionally, but Clara could see him maintaining readiness for coordinated action when the moment presented itself. "Detective Bennett, we need to discuss terms. We want a vehicle, no police pursuit, and a clear route to the interstate. In exchange, we release the hostages unharmed once we reach our destination. I need time to rearrange that. Vehicle procurement and route clearance takes time to coordinate safely." Clara translated both sides of the negotiation through her operational experience. Bennett was buying time while tactical teams positioned themselves and gathered intelligence. Alpha was following a predetermined script designed to secure escape rather than maximize damage. Both sides were professionals playing a complex game where patience and psychology mattered more than firepower. The problem was Beta, who was becoming increasingly unpredictable as stress accumulated. She jerked Evie closer to the window, using the young woman's terror as visible leverage for anyone watching from outside.
"Look at me," Beta commanded, forcing Evie's chin up with rough fingers. "You're going to help us send a message to your friends outside. You're going to tell them exactly what happens if they try to rush this building." Evie's terrified whimper cut through Clara's analytical detachment. The young woman who brought cookies to work and worried about her younger sister was about to become a pawn in psychological warfare designed to maximize law enforcement anxiety. Clara's protective instincts crystallized into operational clarity. She could continue to observe and hope for peaceful resolution, or she could start doing what she had once been trained to do: influence the tactical environment to maximize survival for innocent parties. The choice became academic when Beta pressed her weapon against Evie's temple. "Tell them!" Beta snarled, her voice rising to a pitch that suggested someone losing rational control. "Tell them what happens if they come through that door!" The metallic click of Beta's weapon being cocked sent adrenaline through the room like an electric current. Evie's sob echoed off the marble walls, and Clara saw Miguel's muscles coil for action that would get everyone killed. Clara moved. Not dramatically, nothing that would register as aggression or draw weapons fire. She simply shifted her weight and allowed her elbow to brush against the scattered contents of Mrs. Patterson's purse, sending coins cascading across the marble floor in a bright musical shower that drew every eye in the room. "I'm sorry," Clara said softly, her voice carrying the embarrassed tone of someone who had clumsily made an unfortunate situation worse. "I was trying to get more comfortable and I—" "Shut up!" Beta's attention snapped toward Clara, the weapon wavering away from Evie's head as she processed this new irritation. "Nobody asked you to move." The distraction lasted exactly 3 seconds, but 3 seconds was enough for Evie to step backward, for Miguel to adjust his position slightly, and for Henry Walsh to shift his weight in a way that brought him closer to Beta's blind spot. Clara had created tactical opportunity disguised as civilian clumsiness. "Tanya, focus!" Alpha's sharp command cut through Beta's rising aggression. So her name was Tanya, useful intelligence for later. Eyes on the prize, not on distractions. Tanya's resentment at being corrected in front of hostages was visible in her expression, but she followed orders and redirected her attention toward Evie. Clara noted the interpersonal dynamic. Alpha maintained command authority, but Tanya's compliance was grudging rather than automatic. Stress fractures in team cohesion that could be exploited if the situation continued to deteriorate.
"Sorry," Clara repeated, gathering coins with the careful movements of someone trying to be helpful rather than disruptive. One of the coins rolled toward Miguel's position, and she caught his eye as he instinctively reached to collect it. The coin was nothing, but the brief contact allowed her to pass him the pen she had palmed earlier, pressing it into his hand with the kind of subtle exchange that looked accidental to casual observation. Miguel's expression didn't change, but his fingers closed around the improvised weapon with recognition of its potential. Henry Walsh understood what was happening. Clara caught the elderly man studying her movements with the same analytical attention she was applying to the tactical situation. When she met his gaze, he gave the faintest nod, acknowledgement that they were now operating with shared understanding rather than parallel fear. "Detective Bennett," Alpha called out, apparently deciding to accelerate the negotiation timeline. "We need that vehicle in the next 10 minutes or we start making this situation more complicated for everyone." "I understand your timeline pressure," Bennett responded with unflappable calm. "But vehicle procurement requires coordination with multiple agencies. I need 15 minutes to ensure we can meet your requirements safely." Clara recognized the professional psychology at work. Bennett was applying gentle counter-pressure, establishing that law enforcement had their own operational constraints, while avoiding direct refusal that might escalate tensions. Standard negotiation technique designed to maintain dialogue while buying time for tactical positioning. But Tanya was losing patience with professional courtesy. 10 minutes, she shouted toward the windows, her voice shrill with accumulated stress. Not 15, not 12. 10 minutes, or the pretty girl starts sending signals with bullet holes. Alpha's jaw tightened at Tanya's unauthorized modification of their demands. Clara could see him calculating whether to reassert command authority or allow his partner's aggression to drive the negotiation. Either choice carried tactical implications. Too much control might push Tanya toward open defiance, while too little might encourage her to escalate violence independently. "Tanya," Alpha said carefully, "let me handle the communication. I'm tired of handling." Tanya's emotional control was deteriorating rapidly. "They're stalling while their people get into position. Every minute we wait makes it harder to get out alive." She was right, of course. Clara could hear the subtle sounds of tactical movement outside. Vehicle engines, radio traffic, and the distinctive acoustic signature of personnel deployment. Bennett was following standard protocol while keeping the subjects engaged, while SWAT teams positioned themselves for potential breach operations. The problem was that Tanya's recognition of law enforcement tactics was combined with emotional instability that made her unpredictable and dangerous. Clara had worked with enough volatile partners to recognize the warning signs of someone approaching their breaking point. Miguel must have reached the same conclusion. He caught Clara's attention and gestured almost imperceptibly toward Tanya's position, raising his eyebrows in a question she understood perfectly. "Ready to move?" She shook her head with equal subtlety. "Not yet." Tanya was agitated, but still following Alpha's general command structure. Premature action would escalate the situation before they had sufficient tactical advantage. But she needed to start creating that advantage. Henry Walsh provided the opening she needed. The elderly man coughed, a deep, rattling sound that suggested decades of cigarette smoking and carried just enough apparent distress to draw concerned attention. "You all right, old man?" Alpha asked, his tone carrying genuine concern rather than suspicion. "Just need to clear my throat," Henry replied, coughing again while shifting his position slightly. "This floor is cold, and the stress—" He trailed off with the apologetic expression of someone who didn't want to be trouble. It was beautifully executed misdirection. While everyone's attention focused on Henry's apparent distress, Clara used the moment to adjust her own position. Nothing dramatic, just a subtle shift that brought her closer to the point where she could reach Tanya if necessary, while maintaining the appearance of trying to get comfortable on the hard marble floor. "Everybody just stay calm," Alpha said, dividing his attention between the hostages and the continuing police activity outside. This ends with everyone going home if we all keep our heads." But Clara could see Tanya's stress indicators continuing to climb. Her breathing was becoming more rapid, her weapon handling less disciplined, and her scanning pattern more erratic. In her experience, people in that condition often made catastrophic decisions based on perception rather than reality. The next few minutes would determine whether this remained a professional robbery or became a massacre. Detective Bennett's voice carried through the glass with the steady patience of someone trained to project calm in chaos. Clara listened to his tone and cadence, parsing the subtle psychological techniques embedded in professional negotiation. More importantly, she began to understand how he thought: methodical, patient, intelligent enough to recognize opportunity when it presented itself. That recognition would be crucial for what she was planning. "I want to make sure we're on the same page here," Bennett continued from outside. "You need transportation and safe passage. We need to ensure the safety of everyone inside. Those aren't incompatible goals." Alpha moved closer to the windows, maintaining his position behind cover while keeping visual contact with the law enforcement deployment outside. Clara noted his positioning, professional and tactically sound, but predictable. He favored the left side of the window frame, probably because it provided better sightlines to the street, while maintaining cover from potential sniper positions.
That predictability was useful. While Alpha focused on Bennett's words, Clara began a subtle repositioning that brought her closer to the window's right side. Nothing dramatic or attention-getting, just the careful movements of someone trying to find a more comfortable position on the cold marble floor. The window's surface acted as a weak mirror, reflecting images from inside the bank against the darker background of the storm outside. Clara could see her own reflection, distorted but recognizable, and realized that someone outside, with the right angle and sufficient attention, might be able to read basic hand signals through the glass. Bennett was smart enough to notice details. The question was whether he was trained enough to recognize operational communication when he saw it. Clara tested the theory with a subtle movement. Her left hand raised to brush hair away from her face, a gesture so natural it appeared unconscious. But the timing was deliberate, coordinated with Bennett's vocal pause between sentences. Through the reflected glass, she saw a slight change in the positioning of figures outside. Someone had noticed. "We're working on vehicle procurement," Bennett said, his voice carrying a subtle shift in cadence that suggested he was now speaking to multiple audiences. "But I need confirmation that all hostages remain unharmed. Can you provide visual verification?" Clara understood the request wasn't really about hostage welfare. Bennett was asking for better sightlines into the building, trying to gather tactical intelligence about positioning and weapons. But it also provided her with opportunity. Alpha gestured for Henry Walsh to approach the window again, apparently deciding that Henry's cooperative demeanor made him the safest choice for continued communication. As Henry moved into position, Clara made her own adjustment, a slight shift that brought her reflection into alignment with the window's clearest section. "Detective Bennett, this is Henry Walsh again," Henry lifted, as Alpha held the phone to his ear. "Everyone inside continues to be treated well. No one has been harmed." While Henry spoke, Clara began a sequence of hand movements disguised as natural gestures. Left hand to forehead, one subject at main window. Right hand to shoulder, second subject mobile in lobby area. Both hands together briefly, third subject covering rear exit. Index finger pointed down, hostages on floor, controlled but unharmed. It was basic tactical communication, the kind of field signs she had used in operations where radio silence was mandatory and visual contact was the only way to coordinate with support teams. Bennett might recognize it as intentional communication, or he might dismiss it as nervous movement from a terrified hostage. "Thank you, Mr. Walsh," Bennett responded. "I want everyone to know we're committed to resolving this safely. Just stay calm and continue following instructions."
Clara caught a subtle shift in Bennett's word choice. Continue following instructions rather than follow instructions. A small linguistic adjustment that suggested he understood someone inside was providing tactical information and wanted to encourage continued cooperation. She increased the sophistication of her signals. 3 fingers displayed briefly, weapon count she had observed. Circular motion with her index finger, subjects operating on timed schedule. Palm pressed flat against her chest, interior tactical assessment available. Through the glass reflection, she could see increased activity in the law enforcement positions outside. Nothing dramatic enough to alert Alpha or Tanya, but the purposeful movement of people adjusting positions based on new intelligence. Tanya's stress levels continued climbing as she divided her attention between guarding Evie and monitoring the police activity outside. Clara could see her growing suspicious of the continued negotiation. In Tanya's world, extended dialogue meant law enforcement was preparing for action rather than accommodation. "This is taking too long," Tanya muttered, loud enough for Clara to hear. "They're not going to give us a vehicle. They're just buying time while their people get ready to rush us." She was correct, of course.
Bennett was following standard protocol by maintaining dialogue, while tactical teams prepared for potential breach operations. But Tanya's recognition of tactics was filtered through emotional instability that made her dangerous rather than strategic. Clara needed to accelerate her timeline before Tanya's paranoia triggered violence. She caught Miguel's attention and made a subtle gesture toward her own position near the window. Miguel's military experience kicked in, and he recognized tactical positioning when he saw it. Clara was establishing herself as a communication relay between inside and outside, a function that required both technical skill and considerable personal risk. Miguel's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. He didn't know Clara's background, but he recognized professional competence when he saw it. His positioning adjusted slightly, bringing him into a better support position without drawing attention from the increasingly volatile Tanya. Henry Walsh, still near the window after his conversation with Bennett, caught Clara's eye and gave the faintest nod. Like Miguel, he was beginning to understand that Clara represented something more than a terrified bank teller. His subsequent movements were subtly coordinated to provide her with better cover for continued signaling. "Detective Bennett," Alpha called out, his voice carrying new urgency. "We need that vehicle in 5 minutes, or this conversation changes character significantly." "I understand the time pressure," Bennett responded, his tone maintaining professional calm while carrying an undertone that suggested he was receiving information from sources beyond the official negotiation. "We're making final arrangements now." Clara began her most complex signal sequence yet. Tactical intelligence about Alpha's positioning patterns, Tanya's deteriorating emotional state, and the approximate timeline before the situation would likely escalate beyond negotiation. It was detailed field reporting disguised as the nervous movements of a frightened hostage. She could only hope Bennett was trained well enough to understand what she was telling him, and smart enough to act on it before Tanya made her next mistake. The crack of Tanya's rifle split the air like thunder, sending plaster dust cascading from the ceiling as her warning shot punched through acoustic tiles and embedded itself in the concrete above. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, leaving ears ringing and hearts racing as the reality of their situation crystallized into sharp, immediate terror. "Jesus Christ, Tanya!" Alpha's command authority exploded into furious profanity as he spun away from the windows. "What the hell are you doing?" "Sending a message." Tanya's voice carried the shrill edge of someone whose emotional control had finally snapped. "They think we're bluffing. They think we won't do what we said." Mrs. Patterson whimpered and pressed herself flatter against the marble floor, while other customers flinched away from the drifting plaster dust. But Clara's attention was focused on the tactical implications of Tanya's breakdown. The warning shot had been fired upward rather than at hostages, suggesting some vestige of restraint remained, but her discipline was disintegrating rapidly. More concerning was Alpha's reaction. His professional composure cracked as he processed the implications of unauthorized weapons fire. Outside, the police response would shift immediately from negotiation to tactical intervention. The shot meant the situation was escalating, and escalation in hostage scenarios often triggered aggressive law enforcement response. "You just told them we're losing control," he hissed, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Every cop out there is now calling for breach authorization." He was right. Clara could hear the immediate change in activity outside, radio traffic becoming more urgent, vehicle engines starting, and the distinctive sound of personnel moving with purpose rather than patience. Bennett would be under pressure to resolve the situation quickly before additional shots were fired at actual targets. "Good." Tanya's breakdown was accelerating, her weapons sweeping across the hostages with dangerously loose discipline. "Let them know we're serious. Let them know what happens if they try to rush us." Clara's threat assessment spiked into the red zone. Tanya was no longer following tactical logic. She was operating on pure emotion, and emotional people with automatic weapons in confined spaces created casualty situations very quickly. Miguel was thinking the same thing. Clara caught his eye and saw him calculating distances and angles with the focused intensity of someone preparing for desperate action. He had the pen she'd passed him, but a ballpoint pen against assault rifles required getting close enough to use it, close enough to die if the timing was wrong. Henry Walsh shifted position slightly, bringing himself closer to Tanya's blind spot while maintaining the appearance of trying to avoid falling plaster. The elderly man's movements were deliberate and coordinated. He was positioning himself to provide tactical support if Clara decided to act. "Everyone just calm down," Alpha commanded, dividing his attention between reasserting control over Tanya and monitoring the increased police activity outside. "We're sticking to the plan. No more shots, no more surprises." But Clara could see the fundamental problem with that strategy. Tanya was beyond following plans. She was operating on survival instinct and accumulated stress, making decisions based on fear rather than training. And Alpha's authority over his team was compromised by his partner's public defiance. In Clara's experience, that combination usually ended with everyone dead. "Detective Bennett," Alpha called out, his voice carrying new tension. "That was a warning. The next shot won't be aimed at the ceiling." "I understand you're feeling pressure," Bennett responded, his tone maintaining professional calm with the circumstances. "But I need you to know that we're committed to peaceful resolution. No one wants this to escalate." Clara listened to Bennett's word choice and recognized the subtle shift in his approach. He was no longer buying time for vehicle procurement. He was managing a crisis that had moved beyond negotiation into damage control. The warning shot had triggered protocols that prioritized stopping additional violence over accommodation. Through the window's reflection, she could see tactical teams moving into closer positions. Not the patient surveillance of earlier, but the purposeful deployment of people preparing for immediate action. Bennett might want peaceful resolution, but his commanders would be calculating breach scenarios and acceptable casualty ratios. Tanya's paranoia was becoming self-fulfilling prophecy. "They're moving," Tanya announced, her voice rising to a pitch that suggested someone losing rational thought entirely. "I can see them getting ready to rush us." She grabbed Evie again, dragging the terrified young woman toward the center of the lobby, where she would be visible to anyone watching from outside. This time, the weapon's muzzle was pressed against Evie's head with no pretense of restraint. "Tell them," Tanya screamed toward the windows, "tell them I'll blow her head off if they come through that door." Clara's protective instincts crystallized into cold operational clarity. 3 years of hiding behind Clara Hayes, quiet bank teller, were about to end permanently. But Evie Carter, who brought homemade cookies to work and worried about her younger sister, was not going to die because Clara was afraid of exposure. She began moving.
Not dramatically, nothing that would trigger immediate weapons fire, just a subtle shift in position that brought her closer to Tanya while maintaining the appearance of trying to avoid confrontation. Her breathing slowed to the controlled rhythm she had learned in places where hesitation meant death, and her mind shifted into the hyper-aware state that had once made her valuable to federal task forces. Miguel recognized the change in Clara's demeanor. He didn't understand what he was seeing, but he understood its implications. His own positioning adjusted to provide support for whatever Clara was planning. Henry Walsh was already in position, his elderly frame concealing the tactical awareness of someone who had learned to read dangerous situations during 40 years of walking through neighborhoods where survival required constant vigilance. "Tanya, you need to calm down," Alpha said, his voice carrying the forced patience of someone trying to manage an increasingly volatile situation. "We get out of here alive by staying smart, not by making threats we can't control." But Tanya was beyond rational communication. Her stress indicators had peaked, and Clara recognized the signs of someone whose decision-making had been compromised by adrenaline and fear. In that condition, Tanya was as dangerous to her own team as she was to the hostages. "Smart?" Tanya's voice cracked with hysteria. "Smart is making them understand we're not playing games. Smart is showing them what happens when they try to corner us." The weapon's muzzle pressed harder against Evie's temple, and the young woman's terrified whimper filled the sudden silence that followed Tanya's words. "Clara Hayes, quiet bank teller, died silently. The woman who replaced her had killed people in 7 countries and infiltrated criminal organizations that would have tortured her to death if they had discovered her true identity. She moved with the fluid precision of someone whose survival had once depended on violence applied with surgical accuracy. It was time to go to work. Tanya's attention snapped toward Clara with the sharp focus of predatory suspicion, her weapon wavering away from Evie's head as something in Clara's subtle repositioning triggered alarm bells in her deteriorating mental state. "You," Tanya said, her voice carrying the dangerous edge of someone whose paranoia had found a target. "You've been watching me. You've been planning something." Clara maintained the careful stillness of a terrified hostage, but her mind raced through tactical calculations. Tanya's accusation was accurate. Clara had been watching, planning, positioning herself for action. The question was whether Tanya's instincts were sharp enough to recognize trained surveillance or whether her stress-compromised judgment was creating threats where none existed. "I don't know what you mean," Clara replied, her voice carrying exactly the right amount of confused fear. "I'm just trying to stay out of the way." But Tanya's suspicion was crystallizing into certainty. She stepped away from Evie, her weapon now trained on Clara with unwavering focus. "You're too calm. Everyone else is crying, shaking, begging, but you're just watching, calculating." Alpha divided his attention between monitoring police activity outside and his partner's increasingly erratic behavior. Clara could see him processing the implications of Tanya's accusation. If one of the hostages was more than she appeared, it could compromise their entire operation. "Tanya, focus on the mission," Alpha commanded, but his voice carried new wariness as he studied Clara with professional assessment. "Don't create problems that don't exist." "Look at her." Tanya's voice rose to a dangerous pitch. "Look how she moves. That's not a scared bank teller. That's someone who knows exactly what she's doing." Clara realized her cover was disintegrating rapidly. 3 years of careful civilian camouflage were being stripped away by a paranoid criminal whose instincts were unfortunately accurate. She could continue denying Tanya's accusations and hope for the best, or she could accept that her hidden identity was about to be exposed whether she wanted it or not. Miguel was watching the confrontation with growing alarm, his protective instincts warring with tactical reality. He didn't understand what Tanya was seeing in Clara, but he recognized that the situation was spiraling toward violence that would get everyone killed. Henry Walsh remained motionless near the windows, but Clara caught the subtle shift in his positioning that brought him closer to Alpha's blind spot. The elderly man was preparing to provide support if Clara decided to act, despite having no clear understanding of what she was capable of. "Stand up," Tanya ordered, gesturing with her weapon toward Clara. "Slowly, hands where I can see them." Clara complied with the deliberate movements of someone following orders under duress, but her mind was already shifting into operational mode. If Tanya forced a confrontation, Clara would have approximately 3 seconds to neutralize the threat before Alpha could respond. The challenge was accomplishing that without triggering a massacre of innocent hostages. As Clara rose to her feet, Tanya's paranoia spiked into open hostility. "Search her. Check for weapons, communication devices, anything that proves she's not what she claims to be." Alpha moved toward Clara with professional caution, his own weapon maintained in ready position while he prepared to conduct a search that would reveal nothing incriminating. Clara had been genuinely unarmed when the robbery began, but the search itself would expose her to close contact with both subjects, and close contact created opportunities that didn't exist at range. "Turn around. Hands against the wall." Clara followed instructions with apparent compliance, but her positioning was deliberate. The wall provided stability for sudden movement, and Alpha's search protocol would require him to lower his weapon briefly while maintaining physical control. Standard police procedure, but potentially fatal when applied by criminals who lacked proper training. Tanya maintained overwatch, her weapon trained on Clara while Alpha approached, but her stress levels were so elevated that her discipline was compromised. Weapon position unstable, breathing rapid, attention divided between Clara and the continuing police activity outside. That divided attention was Clara's opportunity. As Alpha reached for her shoulder to begin the search,
Clara moved with the fluid precision of someone whose survival had once depended on violence, applied with surgical accuracy. Not the dramatic Hollywood-style combat that would have gotten everyone shot, but the subtle, efficient techniques designed for confined spaces and multiple threats. Her left hand deflected Alpha's reaching arm while her right hand found the magazine release on Tanya's weapon, a motion so quick and seemingly accidental that it appeared to be nervous fumbling rather than tactical disarmament. The magazine dropped halfway out of the weapon's grip, rendering it useless until properly reseated. "I'm sorry," Clara said, stepping back with her hands raised in apparent surrender. "I'm just scared. I don't know what you want me to do." But Alpha had caught the motion. His military training recognized weapons manipulation when he saw it, and his assessment of Clara shifted immediately from terrified hostage to potential threat. The casual efficiency of her movement, the precise targeting of Tanya's weapon, and the innocent expression that followed, all of it screamed professional training. "That was no accident," Alpha said, his voice carrying cold certainty. "Who are you?" Clara maintained her civilian facade, but she could see the tactical situation deteriorating rapidly. Alpha's suspicion was justified. Tanya's weapon was temporarily compromised, but could be restored quickly, and the third robber was beginning to move from his position near the rear exit to provide support. Miguel recognized the shift in dynamics even without understanding its cause. Clara had done something to change the balance of power in the room, and his positioning adjusted to take advantage of whatever opportunity she had created. "I don't know what you're talking about," Clara replied, but her tone carried less conviction than before. The weight of 3 years' worth of hidden identity was becoming impossible to maintain under direct scrutiny. Tanya fumbled with her weapon, trying to reseat the magazine while maintaining some semblance of threat posture. Her movements were clumsy with adrenaline and confusion, providing Clara with additional seconds to assess the tactical environment. 3 subjects, multiple hostages, law enforcement outside preparing for breach operations. The mathematics of violence in confined spaces, where every action created cascading consequences that could save lives or end them. Alpha raised his weapon toward Clara, his finger moving to the trigger with the deliberate motion of someone prepared to eliminate a threat. "Last chance. Who are you, and what are you doing here?" Clara Hayes, quiet bank teller, looked into Alpha's eyes and made her final decision to stop pretending. "Someone who's very good at staying alive," she said quietly. Then she showed him exactly what that meant. Clara's transformation was instantaneous and terrifying to witness. The quiet bank teller disappeared, replaced by someone whose every movement carried the lethal efficiency of professional violence. She flowed toward Alpha with a kind of controlled aggression that made experienced soldiers step backward involuntarily. But she wasn't operating alone. Now, Clara's command cut through the chaos as she engaged Alpha in close-quarters combat designed to neutralize his weapon without triggering sympathetic fire from his partners. Miguel erupted from his position near the entrance, using the pen Clara had passed him as a distraction weapon while he closed distance on the third robber. His Marine training kicked in with muscle memory that made him dangerous in confined spaces, especially when fighting to protect innocent lives. Henry Walsh moved with surprising agility for his age, positioning himself to shield the other hostages while providing tactical support through simple but effective disruption. The elderly man might not have military training, but 40 years of reading dangerous situations had taught him when to act and when to stay invisible. Tanya's weapon clicked uselessly as she tried to fire. The compromised magazine made it impossible to chamber a round, leaving her with an expensive club rather than a functional rifle. Her confusion turned to panic as she realized her primary asset had been neutralized by someone she'd dismissed as a harmless civilian. "What the hell?" Tanya's exclamation was cut short as Clara's engagement with Alpha sent both of them crashing into a customer service desk, weapons clattering across marble flooring as trained muscle memory met equally trained resistance. Alpha was good. His military background showed in every defensive movement, every attempt to regain tactical advantage. But Clara fought with the desperate efficiency of someone whose survival had once depended on winning battles she couldn't afford to lose. Her techniques were designed for situations where losing meant death, and she applied them with surgical precision. The third robber, Gamma in Clara's mental taxonomy, found himself facing Miguel's improvised assault with growing alarm. The pen wasn't lethal, but Miguel used it to target pressure points and nerve clusters with enough accuracy to compromise Gamma's ability to function effectively. More importantly, Miguel's aggressive approach forced Gamma to focus on immediate threats rather than providing support to his compromised teammates. "Get back!" Tanya screamed, abandoning her useless weapon in favor of a backup pistol she'd concealed in her jacket. "Everyone get back, or I start shooting!" But her authority had evaporated along with her team's tactical advantage. The hostages could see the balance of power shifting, and their terror was being replaced by the kind of desperate hope that made people willing to take risks they would never consider under normal circumstances. Clara broke free from her engagement with Alpha, having successfully disarmed him and inflicted enough damage to compromise his combat effectiveness. Blood ran from his nose where her elbow had connected, and his left arm hung at an awkward angle that suggested significant injury. "It's over," Clara said, her voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to controlling violent situations. "Put down the weapon, and this ends with everyone going home alive." But Tanya was beyond rational negotiation. Her psychological breakdown accelerated as she processed the destruction of everything she thought she understood about their tactical situation. The quiet bank teller had somehow dismantled their entire operation in less than 30 seconds, and Tanya's mind couldn't reconcile that reality with her assumptions about civilian helplessness. "You're dead. You're all dead." Clara was already moving, her body flowing into evasive patterns while her mind calculated angles and distances with predatory precision. But Tanya's weapon was pointed in the general direction of the hostages, and a scared criminal with poor discipline could create massive casualties even with terrible armsmanship. That's when Detective Bennett's tactical team made their move. The front windows exploded inward as shape charges created simultaneous entry points for law enforcement officers equipped with military-grade equipment and extensive hostage rescue training. Flashbang grenades filled the air with disorienting noise and light, while laser sights painted red dots across every surface in the building. "Police! Everyone down!" Clara threw herself over Evie, using her own body as a shield, while the room filled with tactical personnel whose training was designed for exactly this scenario. Miguel covered Mrs. Patterson and another elderly customer, while Henry Walsh pressed himself against the floor with the practiced agility of someone who understood that survival often meant making yourself invisible. The engagement lasted less than 10 seconds. Alpha, already compromised by his fight with Clara, was taken down by multiple officers using non-lethal force designed to incapacitate rather than kill. Gamma, disoriented by Miguel's assault and the explosive entry, surrendered immediately when faced with overwhelming tactical superiority. Tanya tried to maintain resistance, but her psychological state made effective combat impossible. She fired wildly in the general direction of the entry points, her shots going high and wide as officers closed distance with professional precision. When the taser struck her, she dropped like a stone, her weapon clattering harmlessly across the marble flooring. Silence filled the bank building, broken only by the quiet voices of law enforcement personnel confirming that all threats had been neutralized and all hostages were accounted for. Clara remained motionless over Evie until she heard Detective Bennett's voice confirming that the area was secure. Only then did she raise her head and meet his eyes across the debris-filled lobby. Their gazes locked for a moment that carried volumes of unspoken communication. Bennett's expression combined professional respect with obvious curiosity. He'd witnessed enough of Clara's capabilities to understand that her background included training that he hadn't expected from a quiet bank teller. But he also understood that some questions were better left unasked. The aftermath of tactical operations always carried a surreal quality that Clara remembered from her previous life. The sudden transition from lethal violence to bureaucratic procedure, from life-or-death decisions to paperwork and witness statements. She sat in the bank's customer service area, watching paramedics treat minor injuries while crime scene technicians documented evidence with methodical precision. Detective Bennett approached with 2 cups of coffee and the patient expression of someone who understood that debriefing required both time and trust. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering one of the cups while settling into the adjacent chair. "It's been a long afternoon." Clara accepted the coffee gratefully, noting that Bennett positioned himself at an angle that suggested conversation rather than interrogation. His body language was relaxed but attentive, professional courtesy extended to someone whose actions had helped save lives. "Thank you," Clara said, her voice carrying the exhaustion that followed adrenaline crashes. "Is everyone all right?" "Everyone's going home tonight. Minor cuts and bruises, some hearing damage from the flash bangs, but nothing serious. Times in part to some very impressive situational awareness from certain bank employees." Clara understood the subtext. Bennett had observed enough of her tactical capabilities to know that her background included training that went beyond customer service and cash counting. But he was offering her the opportunity to provide explanations on her own terms rather than under formal questioning. "I was just trying to help," Clara said carefully. "I'm sure you were, but most bank tellers don't know how to disable assault rifles with casual hand movements. Most civilians don't position themselves for tactical advantage while appearing to comply with hostage demands." Through the windows, Clara could see media vehicles arriving as news of the incident spread. Soon there would be reporters asking questions, investigators reviewing security footage, and the kind of attention that made anonymity impossible to maintain. 3 years of hiding behind Clara Hayes, quiet bank teller, were officially over.
"The important thing is that no one was seriously hurt," Clara said, redirecting attention away from her own actions toward the successful resolution. Bennett nodded, apparently willing to accept that non-answer for the moment. "The subjects are in custody, and initial statements suggest this was part of a larger operation targeting multiple financial institutions. Your observations from inside may be crucial for understanding their methodology." Clara understood the offer being extended. Cooperation with the investigation, in exchange for discretion about her background, a professional courtesy extended between people who recognized mutual competence. Miguel appeared at her shoulder, his expression combining gratitude with obvious curiosity about Clara's transformation during the crisis. His military experience had given him enough context to recognize professional training when he saw it, but not enough information to understand its source. "Clara," he said quietly, "I wanted to thank you. What you did in there, I've never seen anything like it." "You did pretty well yourself," Clara replied, deflecting attention toward Miguel's own contributions. "That improvised assault with the pen was textbook urban combat." Miguel's eyebrows raised at her casual use of tactical terminology, but he didn't press for explanations. Like Bennett, he seemed to understand that some background information was offered voluntarily or not at all. Evie approached with hesitant steps, her young face still showing signs of the terror she'd experienced as Tanya's primary target. But her expression also carried the kind of profound gratitude that came from understanding how close she had come to not going home that night. "Clara," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know what you did, but thank you for keeping me safe." Clara stood and embraced the younger woman with genuine warmth. Whatever else had changed that afternoon, her protective feelings toward her colleagues remained constant. "I don't need to thank you," Clara said softly. "That's what people do for each other." Henry Walsh joined their small group, his weathered face carrying the satisfied expression of someone who had contributed meaningfully to a successful outcome. His tactical contributions had been subtle but effective, providing distraction and cover when Clara needed them most. "Quite an afternoon," Henry observed with deliberate understatement. "Makes you appreciate quiet days at the bank." Clara caught the elderly man's eye and recognized shared understanding.
Henry had demonstrated tactical awareness that suggested either natural instinct or acquired experience, and his willingness to act when action was needed had made the difference between success and catastrophe. Quiet days are underrated, Clara agreed. Detective Bennett finished his coffee and stood, apparently satisfied with the preliminary information he'd gathered. When he spoke, his voice carried the professional respect of one operative acknowledging another. If you ever decide you want to stop working in banking, the Chicago PD can always use people with your particular skill set. The door is always open. Clara understood the offer being extended, a return to the kind of work she had once done, the opportunity to use her training in service of protecting innocent people. It was tempting in ways that surprised her, but it also represented a return to the world she had tried to leave behind. I appreciate that, Clara said carefully, but I think I'm happy where I am. Bennett nodded, apparently unsurprised by her response. He handed her a business card with contact information printed in simple black text. In case you change your mind, or if you ever need someone who understands that some questions don't need answers. As Bennett walked away, Clara realized that her 3 years of hiding were over, but her choice of how to move forward remained her own. She could return to civilian life with the understanding that certain people now knew there was more to her story than appeared on the surface, or she could accept that her past had found her, regardless of how carefully she had tried to bury it. Either way, she would make that choice on her own terms. Clara Hayes, former federal operative turned bank teller, looked around the lobby where she had worked for over a year without attracting attention. Tomorrow there would be new security protocols, different procedures, and the kind of heightened awareness that followed traumatic events. But she would be here, continuing to help customers and protect the people who had become more than colleagues. They had become family worth fighting for. Some things, Clara realized, were worth coming out of hiding to protect. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.